Management is defined as getting work done through and with other people. It has two concerns: a concern on the one hand for tasks, and a concern on the other hand for the people who perform the tasks. To be successful, the supervisor must keep both concerns in extraordinarily high balance. When managing, the supervisor uses the management process. When using the management process, the supervisor develops plans, communicates them to the work team, and controls progress, sets priorities, analyzes work to be done and reviews completed work in terms of the big picture, makes decisions, assigns work and follows up to see that it is done, analyzes and solves problems, anticipates problems, and takes steps to prevent problems. Finally, the supervisor executes policies. Besides these, the supervisor performs many other duties needed to get work done through and with other people. The management process. How does management work? The management process is a series of 5 basic management functions or processes. The words functions and processes are used here interchangeably. For example, when performing the function of planning, the supervisor uses the planning process. Or, when performing the function of organizing, the supervisor uses the organizing process, and so on. Here, we see that the 5 functions or processes are a cycle that is perpetually repeated. When all 5 are done, one has completed what is called the management process or cycle. The 5 functions of management must be performed in this exact order. If they are done out of order, the process will be unsuccessful. It will become apparent from the following discussion that they must be performed exactly in this sequence. The cycle begins with the planning function and proceeds through the cycle to evaluating. One can see that the order is as follows: 1. Planning. 2. Organizing. 3. Controlling. 4. Supervising. And 5. Evaluating. Now, many people say that there are 2 other processes, coordinating and directing. Coordinating and directing are not really pure management processes. They are management activities, and they can be performed throughout the management cycle at any point. They are managerial activities, but they are not managerial functions. Planning, organizing, controlling, supervising, and evaluating. These 5 are the pure management functions for the processes of management. Most organizations, believe it or not, do the worst jobs at the first, planning, and the last function, evaluating. If the management team does a really poor job in these 2 functions, eventually the organization will be unable to survive. All of these functions, except for supervising, require what are called the rational skills. Rational skills are primarily concerned with task work. Supervising requires interpersonal skills and is concerned primarily with people. In your job as a supervisor, both sets of skills are essential. Let's briefly examine each of these 5 functions to show how they are the critical elements of a manager's job, and to show how they are interrelated. The planning process helps the supervisor set the future direction for the work group. In other words, what should be accomplished and what will be needed to do it. When planning, the supervisor sets an objective that specifies a time frame and resources needed to hit the objective or target. If a supervisor says, "I'm going to produce 100 table lamps," that is not a plan. If the supervisor says, "I'm going to produce 100 table lamps starting on January 7th and ending on January 14th at a cost of $5,000 using 10 people, 400 person-hours of labor, 50 pounds of sheet metal, 100 sockets, 800 feet of wire, and so on," that's a plan. It specifies an objective and the time and resources needed to hit the objective. Plans are very precise and very specific. When you listen to good planners, you get very clear mental images of targets. Everything is very clearly defined. Planning is precise and specific. It is not coming in the morning and saying, "Well, what should we do today?" To be effective, plans need to be communicated. Planning is essential before performing the other 4 management functions. Planning, by its nature, is oriented toward the future. When planning, the manager is attempting to deal with the uncertainty and risks of the future. By setting a 6-month production plan for building table lamps, the supervisor can order raw materials in advance. This reduces the risk of a production delay because materials cannot be purchased and delivered at a later time when they are needed for production. Supervisory planning actions are really methods for managing risk. What the manager is attempting to accomplish is to either influence the future in a positive way or to prepare to react to the future. For example, when ordering materials, the supervisor may find that one supplier cannot furnish all that is needed. Time is then available to find alternate sources before work is delayed. Without proper planning, a manager would be at the mercy of all events and situations as they happen. He or she would be a victim of the future. Organizing is the process of allocating resources and people in proper sequence in order to meet the objectives set in the planning process. The supervisor can assign the 10 employees building the lamps to various tasks. For example, 1 to fabricating piece parts, 1 to preparing wires, sockets, and plugs, 1 to soldering, 4 to assembling, 1 to painting, 1 to inspecting and testing, and 1 to packaging and crating. Many organizations that may be good at planning still have problems. What they're not good at is setting up a sequence that allocates the resources across the board in order to accomplish the plan. This is why many organizations find departments fighting or competing for resources, or why there never seems to be enough people or enough money or time in order for all departments to complete what was planned. This can happen even though the plan may have been very clear, very specific. So, organizing is the allocating of resources in sequence, and the key word is in sequence. If the sequence is not correct, then organizing becomes a source of great conflict within organizations. For most managers, there are many pre-made decisions which affect the organizing process. For example, the structure of the organization is already set. The lines of authority are usually drawn, and there are rules to follow on how to use people and resources. However, the manager does have the ability to perform the following 3 organizing activities. Number 1, exacting responsibilities, that is, holding people accountable. Number 2, delegating authority. Number 3, assigning duties or tasks to be performed. Organizing relates to planning in 2 ways. First, organizing provides a sequence that allocates resources to reach the objectives of a plan. Second, the organizing steps should be considered during the planning process. The controlling function involves management activities where the manager monitors or checks progress toward planned objectives to see if the work group is on or off target and by how much. The easiest way to remember controlling is that it is the other side of planning. The best plans in the world, including rescue plans, will fail without adequate controls. Controls are merely checkpoints to tell you whether you're on or off target. Will I hit the target? Will I miss the target? If I'm going to miss it, by how much? The essential thing to remember for supervisors is that good control allows time to correct. One of the problems with controls is that they tend to be historical. If a supervisor hears, "Last month you were $500 over budget," he or she is likely not to be too happy because it is done and over, and there's nothing that can be done to change the situation. Historical controls are bad because they are too late to help change performance. Let me give you an illustration. Let's say that an airline pilot who is starting out on a flight starts with a very detailed flight plan. It will tell the pilot exactly how to fly from one city to another. As soon as the pilot gets into the airplane, closes the cockpit door, starts the engine, proceeds down the runway, and enters the air, the plan, for all intents and purposes, becomes a pretty useless document without adequate controls. Once in the air, the pilot must rely upon all the avionic controls in the aircraft to learn if the plane is flying at the correct altitude, in the correct direction, and at the correct speed. Without these checkpoints along the way, the pilot would not know if the plane were flying according to plan. The pilot would not know if they were flying, let's say, from New York to San Francisco, or from New York to Los Angeles. The controls are the tools and methods which give the plan life and validity as it is implemented, while it is underway. Now, one of the problems with organizations is that they frequently over-control. Some supervisors attempt to control in the wrong way. Anyone who has experienced a supervisor or manager hanging over their shoulders and bugging them every 15 minutes to see whether or not they're getting their work done according to plan has experienced this situation. This constant looking over someone's shoulder and bugging them to perform differently is an attempt to control the people and not the plan. Usually, people react poorly when the controls are aimed at their minute-by-minute behaviors instead of their progress toward an objective. People do not like being manipulated. If a supervisor focuses on having control over the plan, he or she will automatically be controlling the work outputs of the people. But a mistake most supervisors make is that they attempt to control the behaviors of people. People generally react negatively to this attempt at manipulation. The supervising process involves leading, motivating, coaching, and training subordinates in the day-to-day performance of their jobs. When supervising, the supervisor directs the human effort to implement the plans that have been set. Evaluating involves measuring what results have actually been achieved and then comparing them to the planned results. If the actual results are different from the planned results, the supervisor will see the performance gap. For example, if the supervisor building the table lamps plans to build 100 in a week and actually only builds 80, then a performance gap of 20 lamps will be defined. This is an extremely important management function because there's no sense in doing the first 4 functions if the 5th, evaluating, is not done. This tells you whether or not the plan worked. Furthermore, if this is not done, the supervisor can never follow up and plan to do it better or differently. The performance gap is very important in this process. It is the difference between the plan and actual results. The same evaluating concepts apply regardless of whether you are a very small business or a very large business. Organizations of all sizes are constantly looking for the performance gaps. There are 3 critical things that the performance gap is examined against. Number 1 is the size of the gap, because the size of it can put you out of operation. Number 2 are the reasons for it. And the third thing you are looking for is the solution to it. This is where the follow-up comes in. Now, isn't evaluating a rational, reasonable thing for supervisors and managers to do? Unfortunately, however, in many organizations it does not occur. What does occur whenever a performance gap is identified is that many supervisors hear all kinds of excuses. For example, they may hear, "We could have done our part if marketing would have supplied the correct forecast," or if personnel had hired the people on time, or if purchasing had ordered the basic materials in advance, or if engineering had not made an error in the designs. When this occurs, the organization is not really doing performance gap analysis. It's playing what is called the blame game. People throughout the organization are constantly blaming other people for why their results weren't what was expected. If the organization really looks at the size and the reasons for the gap, next time around they can plan to get the forecast in advance, to have engineering check the designs before they're released, to give personnel more notice so that they can provide the people when needed, and also to meet with purchasing so that they can supply the parts on time. 4 actions would eliminate this performance gap. What the supervisor may find in doing gap analysis is that the original objective was not really possible in the first place. This helps the supervisor readjust his or her expectations. Within each of the management functions, there are a number of management activities with which most managers should be familiar. For example, planning activities include setting goals and objectives, problem solving, decision making, coordinating, setting procedures, establishing work methods, specifying resources needed, forecasting production, budgeting, scheduling vacations and appointments, and so on. Organizing activities include delegating, allocating resources, defining reporting relationships, organization structuring, coordinating, budgets, resources, and so on. Controlling activities include measuring progress, problem solving, counseling, correcting activities of subordinates, reviewing production reports, observing work, and so on. Supervising activities include coordinating, coaching, counseling, leading, and motivating. And evaluating activities include conducting performance appraisals, performing results measurement and observation activities, coordinating, and so on. As you can see, some of the basic management activities are duplicated in all of the management functions, which further highlights the interdependence and interrelation between the management functions or processes and their activities.